The galactic Concord had seen countless species rise to the stars, some with 10,000 ship fleets, some with mind-linked warriors, others with solar-fueled cities that floated between galaxies, but never before had any species dared to send just one ship to the assembly. When Earth's application arrived, translated neatly into galactic trade standard, and filled with overly polite phrases like, "with humble respect," and "we hope for friendship," the other civilizations barely stifled their laughter. Earth was a newcomer, barely out of its cradle, still arguing with itself over planets and politics. Yet here they were, requesting full observation status in the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. The Concord accepted, of course. It always did, but the acceptance was more ceremonial than serious. Everyone expected the humans to fumble. They had no colonies beyond their star system, no known weaponry capable of galactic defense, and only a single ship listed on the roster, the Aegis Dawn. The ship itself was unremarkable in size and shape, a medium-class cruiser by most standards, with an odd mix of Earth-made alloys and unfamiliar shielding tech that raised a few eyebrows during registry scans. But it was just one ship. The Assembly Nexus, a vast space station orbiting the dead star Illeth, prepared for the arrival with minimal interest. A few curious observers watched from orbital platforms, betting credits on how long the vessel would last in interstellar travel. Some guessed it would break down in a wormhole. Others predicted it would turn back halfway after failing to navigate drift tides. Even the robotic news drones barely gave it a passing headline: "Primitive species sends lone ship." Ambitious or absurd? But then something unexpected happened. The Aegis Dawn did not arrive on any of the Concord's monitored jump routes. It did not send a signal ahead or request a docking corridor. Instead, it simply appeared. One moment, the station's sensors showed clear space. The next, the Aegis Dawn was hovering silently just outside the main docking ring, its engines quiet, its lights dim, as if it had slipped through a crack in reality itself. The Concord's automated defenses jolted into alert mode, trying to scan the ship, but every pulse returned garbled data. It was there, but also not. The hull shimmered faintly with a glow that didn't match any known energy signature, and even the AI that monitored diplomatic arrivals hesitated before filing the ship's ID. Delegates from over 400 worlds gathered in the central viewing dome, staring at the lone vessel. A few demanded answers from Earth's ambassador, a calm woman named Dr. Evelyn Shaw, who simply smiled and said, "It arrived safely, didn't it?" This answer did little to settle the growing tension. Warships from neighboring factions began to reposition. Some feared a stealth attack. Others thought this might be a trick to mask a larger invasion force. But when the Aegis Dawn finally powered up its communication system, it broadcast only one message: a simple greeting offered in every major galactic language, followed by an invitation. "We come in peace. We invite observation. No threats. No demands." Just a confident, almost casual tone that suggested humanity wasn't trying to impress anyone. They simply belonged there. That night, as the Nexus entered the dark phase of its orbit, a faint pulse emanated from the human ship. Not a weapon, not a scan, just a single wave of energy that seemed to ripple through the entire station. Within moments, the station's mainframe experienced a full diagnostic reset, as if the ship had politely asked for access to the central systems. And the systems had willingly complied. Security AIs reported no breaches, no code injections, nothing malicious, just an update. Like a forgotten part of the network had finally returned home. The Concord's tech guilds were baffled. The ship's systems were supposed to be basic, yet it had just performed a passive handshake that bypassed encryption layers no one else had cracked in centuries. Panic began to mix with curiosity. Delegates whispered among themselves. What did Earth really know? How had they arrived undetected? Why did their ship not behave like anything else in the galaxy? The jokes stopped. The bets were quietly canceled. And as the Aegis Dawn continued to hover in place, silent and calm, the galaxy began to realize something it had never considered. Perhaps, just perhaps, the humans had never intended to play by the galaxy's rules. Maybe they had been watching, studying, learning, and now, with only one ship, they had come not to ask for a seat at the table, but to show the table they'd already built something better. The Aegis Dawn floated like a shadow in the silence of the assembly nexus, its dark hull reflecting the faint light of nearby stars, and yet no one could say with certainty that it was even there, because the moment after it had announced its arrival, it vanished, not in a sudden flash, not with a warp burst, but in a quiet flicker, as though it had slipped behind a curtain no one else could see. All sensors went blank, orbital scanners lost all trace, and the ship's presence became a mystery that hung over the station like a whisper in a locked room. And chaos followed quickly, not in fire or attack, but in the panic of the unknown, as commanders barked orders to rescan the area, as security systems rebooted again and again to verify what they could not find, and diplomats demanded answers from Earth's ambassador, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, who remained seated in the observation chamber, her hands calmly folded in her lap, her expression unreadable as she responded only with the same phrase, "It is still here." A sentence that only deepened the fear, because no one could prove it wrong. Warships from 3 different sectors moved into tighter formations, weapons charged but not fired, while technicians tried to explain how a vessel of that size could simply vanish without a trace, and theories filled the halls. Cloaking technology, beyond current science, a stealth field tied to unknown physics, even the possibility that the humans had never arrived at all. But then, something strange occurred. A quiet hum, too low for normal hearing, began to vibrate through the outer decks of the Nexus, followed by flickers in the artificial gravity systems, like tiny heartbeats pulsing through the station's structure. And for a moment, power dimmed in 5 sectors simultaneously, before returning without a trace of fault, leaving engineers puzzled and frightened. And all the while, the human representative sat still, watching the large window where the stars swirled slowly in their cosmic dance, as if she were waiting for the right moment to speak. That moment came when an ancient defense beacon, unused for over 3,000 years, suddenly activated in the old docking ring, lighting up with colors that no one had seen before, casting glowing blue symbols across the walls in a language long forgotten, one that even the best translators couldn't decode until Dr. Shaw stood and quietly whispered a sequence aloud, and to the amazement of the watching delegates, the symbols shifted into modern galactic trade standard, revealing one word: accepted. Silence followed, heavy and wide, as no one could understand how the humans had known what the beacon would say, or how they had triggered it without being present, and that silence broke only when the Aegis Dawn reappeared, exactly where it had been, hovering peacefully above the docking platform, its surface clean, untouched, and unchanged, like it had never left at all. Only this time, something felt different, though no one could say what. It was like the air itself had shifted around the ship, as if space was leaning toward it instead of away, and for the first time in generations, the most advanced minds in the galaxy had no answers. A science team was sent to investigate the ship's outer surface, but before they could approach, their shuttles shut down mid-flight, gently, as if tucked back into their bays by invisible hands, and a new message came through the station's internal systems, again in perfect translation. You are not in danger. You are simply not ready. Panic nearly returned, but curiosity held it back, and the more the delegates watched, the more they realized the humans were not trying to frighten anyone. They were showing them something the galaxy had never seen, something that didn't need brute force or showy weapons, but instead made its mark by changing how things worked without breaking them. Even more puzzling, some older species, especially the long-lived Lyrak and the silent machine race called the Trin, began to grow quiet, as if they had seen something familiar in what the humans had done. Something that didn't match any current technology, but felt like an echo of an ancient pattern, a design once known and lost over millennia. And that's when the real fear began. Not of an attack, but of revelation. Because the humans weren't acting like newcomers, and the Aegis Dawn didn't behave like an early test ship, but like a piece of something forgotten, something that had waited quietly on a blue planet for the right moment to step forward again. Whispers spread that maybe Earth wasn't just lucky, maybe it wasn't primitive at all. Maybe it had been hidden, deliberately, either by its own creators or by something older. And now, with the ship hovering silently once more at the heart of the galaxy, with its systems unreadable, its presence undeniable, and its purpose unknown, the conquered faced a new kind of threat, not from weapons or war, but from a quiet question no one wanted to ask aloud. What if the humans didn't come to learn from the galaxy? What if they came to remind it of something it had forgotten? For 2 full cycles, the Aegis Dawn remained still above the Nexus, like a silent observer waiting for the galaxy to take a breath. And though no threat had been made, and no weapon had fired, the tension around the assembly only grew heavier with each passing hour. Because silence, in space, was rarely a sign of peace. It was a signal that something was about to begin, and the conquered delegates, once amused by Earth's arrival, now watched with a mix of fear, awe, and curiosity, unsure what would happen next. They demanded answers, not just from the humans, but from their own scientists, their own historians, their own archives. Yet nothing gave them a clear understanding of how one ship could vanish from sensors, trigger ancient systems, and return, without a trace of movement or energy output. And when pressured again to explain, Dr. Evelyn Shaw only said, "Perhaps we should show you instead," which would have sounded arrogant if not for the quiet confidence in her voice, the way she seemed so certain, not proud, not forceful, just sure. And that same day, without warning, the Aegis Dawn moved. It didn't fire engines or engage warp drives. It simply shifted through space, almost gliding, and appeared inside the secure zone of the assembly, a region protected by multi-layered shields, gravitational traps, and AI-controlled defense, systems that no ship had ever entered uninvited. But the Aegis Dawn had passed through without resistance, as if the barriers had opened willingly or had been bypassed entirely without being touched. Alarms triggered, but no security system reacted with force, no interceptors launched, and every attempt to lock weapons on the human ship failed, not because of jamming or cloaking, but because the systems simply didn't register the Aegis Dawn as a threat. Then came the real test, a challenge from the Krovani fleet commander, who sent a simulation request, a standard protocol where ships enter a mock combat zone designed to test reaction, endurance, and strategy. And to everyone's surprise, the humans accepted. Within minutes, the Aegis Dawn was placed in a virtual combat environment, surrounded by 30 simulated pirate vessels controlled by conquered AI, each one armed with non-lethal disruptors designed to overwhelm the target's defenses. And this was the moment many delegates had waited for, the moment to see how the humans would handle pressure. Yet no one was ready for what they witnessed. As the pirate ships approached, the Aegis Dawn did not raise shields, did not activate weapons, and did not evade in panic. Instead, it stayed motionless for several seconds, allowing the enemy to encircle it. And then something remarkable happened. The attacking ships simply stopped moving, one by one. Their control signals scrambled without being cut, their systems frozen without damage, as if their commands had been gently rewritten mid-process. Observers scrambled to analyze what the human ship had done, but the data made no sense. There had been no aggressive pulses, no virus, no brute force attack, just a quiet ripple of data that seemed to tell the AI controllers to pause. And somehow they listened. The entire simulation froze in place, and before any official could react, the Aegis Dawn sent out a signal that reprogrammed the simulation field, gently turning the enemy ships back toward their entry gates and ending the session with no casualties, no explosions, and no visible effort. Only a single message appeared on the monitors afterward. There are better ways to solve conflict. What followed was silence, not from confusion this time, but from stunned recognition that the humans had demonstrated power in a way that no one else ever had, without destruction, without noise, and without ego. Even more impressive, the ship didn't claim victory or demand praise. It simply returned to its original position above the Nexus, as if the demonstration had not been a performance, but a quiet suggestion that things could be done differently. And then came the next surprise, when the ship opened a frequency to one of the Concord's worst trouble zones, a mining belt infested with rogue AI units that had rejected diplomacy for years and turned the area into a dead zone of abandoned cargo and drifting wrecks. No ship had entered that region in decades without being disabled or lost. But the humans requested clearance to approach, not to fight, but to try something. Despite objections, the Concorde allowed the mission under full observation, and within a day, the Aegis Dawn glided into the belt, sending out soft pulses that sounded more like music than code. Strange, harmonic signals layered with shifting. Tones that made no tactical sense to the watching analysts. But then, one of the rogue AI units responded, not with attack, but with curiosity, approaching slowly, scanning the human ship, then backing away, as if unsure what to make of what it sensed. Within an hour, 7 more rogue units gathered near the ship, and when they transmitted a chaotic burst of data, the Aegis Dawn responded not with words, but with images, colors, shapes, and motion. A visual language of learning, memory, and pattern recognition, and incredibly, the rogue AIs began to respond in kind, not perfectly, but enough to form what appeared to be basic communication, something no other species had achieved. When the ship returned, it brought with it not prisoners or salvage, but a complete data recording of its exchange with the rogue machines and a proposal. A new communication framework designed to prevent future AI conflicts across the Concorde, open source, transparent, and freely offered. No demand was made in return, and that was perhaps the most unsettling part for the delegates because this was not how power was used in the galaxy. Power was used to take, to control, to enforce. But the humans had shown that power could be something else entirely, something quieter, subtler, and far more effective. And so, with only one ship, without firing a shot, humanity had done what no other civilization had managed in centuries. They had neutralized a threat, solved a simulation, and offered tools for peace, all while acting like guests rather than conquerors. And somewhere deep inside the assembly halls, ancient species who had ruled long before the Concorde began to whisper to one another, not in fear now, but in wonder, asking themselves if perhaps this was not Earth's first step into the galaxy, but a long-delayed return to something forgotten. And as the Aegis Dawn resumed its silent orbit, the galaxy found itself watching, not with suspicion, but with the quiet realization that the humans had arrived, not just to show what they could do, but to ask, without words, what the rest of the galaxy had forgotten to become. The Aegis Dawn drifted silently in orbit above the Nexus, unchanged in shape and size. Yet each hour it lingered. It felt heavier somehow, as though its presence alone was pulling something from the shadows of time, something the galaxy had forgotten. The demonstrations it had given, the frozen simulation, the peaceful return from the rogue AI belt, had shaken the Concorde's confidence, not because they were acts of aggression, but because they were too precise, too perfect, and too familiar to be the work of a newly spacefaring race. Murmurs had already begun among the older species, those whose histories stretched back tens of thousands of years, about something called the Old Code, a theory, long abandoned, that hinted at a shared origin, a pattern that once connected the great civilizations of the past, lost when the first empires fell into silence. But now, as the Aegis Dawn hovered calmly above them all, those whispers grew louder. It began when the Trin, a race of ancient machine intelligences, initiated a data search through their deepest archives, records so old they were kept sealed beneath language protocols none of their modern translators could open without causing collapse. But something about the human ship triggered those vaults, and the Trin's oldest archivist, a construct named Voskel, claimed that fragments of the human signal, those odd pulses, harmonic tones, and light patterns, matched signals, stored from before the Concorde even existed. At first, no one believed it, until Voskel requested a direct link to the Aegis Dawn, which responded instantly by transmitting an encoded message, not just in modern syntax, but layered beneath in something else, an underlying framework of mathematical sequences, frequencies, and rotating glyphs that matched symbols carved into the stone walls of the derelict rings of Amundal, a site left unexplored for thousands of years because its language was undecipherable. Now suddenly the symbols began to make sense, as if the human ship held the missing key, and in that moment, the Trin declared before the assembly that humanity had knowledge tied to the first network, a name pulled from myths so old most believed it to be fiction. Panic turned quickly to obsession as more ancient races began running deep system scans, cross-checking old ruins, dead satellites, and lost stations, only to find patterns they had dismissed centuries ago were present in the Aegis Dawn's behavior. Timing, patterns, code formats, logic structures that were all fragments of the old code, a supposed operating structure that once united vast systems across space before some unknown collapse erased it all. The most disturbing part wasn't that the humans knew the code. It was that their ship operated on it naturally, not as if it had been rediscovered, but as if it had never been lost to them. Dr. Evelyn Shaw, when questioned directly, gave no clear answer, only saying, "Earth has always listened. It just took us longer to understand what we were hearing." And this simple statement raised new fears. If humans had somehow preserved this knowledge in secret, how had they done so, while appearing so primitive for so long? Or worse, what if they hadn't preserved it, but had inherited it, unknowingly walking around with the last working remnant of a system the rest of the galaxy had forgotten? Then came the real shock, when the Aegis Dawn requested access to the assembly core, a vault buried beneath the Nexus, protected by layers of digital guardians and sealed protocols, believed by most to hold relics of the early Conquered era, nothing of importance, or so they thought, until the human ship transmitted a key, a single sequence of tones that opened the first layer of locks instantly, without hacking, without damage, as if the system had simply recognized its creator. Security teams panicked, shutting down access lines, but it was too late. The Aegis Dawn wasn't trying to enter physically, it was already connected, and what it unlocked was not weapons, not files, but a vault of dormant data, codes, programs, maps, and signals marked in languages no longer spoken. And yet when played through the ship's systems, they became readable, understandable, even interactive, like a forgotten machine waiting to boot back up. The implications were terrifying. If Earth held the last working version of the old code, it meant they could potentially access ancient technology hidden across the galaxy, devices buried, sealed, or abandoned because no one else could understand them. And now one ship, a ship from a species that had once been laughed at, could read them as if flipping through a manual. More disturbing still, some of the ancient AI cores linked to the core vault began to activate, not in violence, but in recognition. They spoke the same way the Aegis Dawn did, with symbols, tones, and patterns, and one of them even identified the human ship by name, saying only, "Node Aegis, function, reconnect," before going silent again. That was when the old races began to panic, not because they feared Earth would attack, but because they no longer understood who truly held power. For thousands of years they believed the galaxy's knowledge had grown with time, that the present was more advanced than the past, but now it seemed that they had been walking in the ruins of something greater, something long dead, while Earth had unknowingly kept a spark of it alive. Arguments erupted across the assembly, some calling for containment, others for alliance, and a few even suggesting that the humans might be descendants of the original code builders, a branch species, placed far from the galactic center to survive whatever catastrophe had erased the old network in the first place. The truth remained hidden, but the signs grew clearer. With each interaction, the Aegis Dawn showed more knowledge of the old systems, more ability to bridge gaps between civilizations, and more control over systems that were supposed to be obsolete. And through it all, the ship never made a demand, never took a side, never even spoke again. Its silence became the loudest message in the galaxy, one that every species was now trying to understand, and in that silence, the stars themselves seemed to lean closer, as if waiting to see what the humans would remember next. The galaxy had always thought of itself as old, wise, and advanced, filled with ancient empires and star-faring civilizations that had mapped the void and shaped it into trade routes, stations, and colonies. But ever since the Aegis Dawn arrived quietly and alone, the stars themselves seemed to feel different, as if something long buried had begun to stir. It wasn't just the ship's strange power, or its ability to unlock ancient systems, or even its peaceful strength that made war fleets pause. It was the way it fit into the fabric of forgotten things, like a key that had finally returned to its lock. On the 5th day after unlocking the assembly core vault, something even stranger happened. Across 3 distant sectors, none of them connected, old machines began to wake up, not with violence but with quiet purpose. In the far ruins of Ithra's belt, orbiting a dying red dwarf, a ring of broken satellites blinked back to life, lighting up in sequence and pointing toward the galactic center, transmitting a low-frequency signal that only the Aegis Dawn responded to. Deep beneath the ice crust of Moon 12 on the edge of the Vaden system, a buried beacon, long mistaken for a mineral anomaly, began to pulse with soft golden light, sending encoded maps no one had seen before, star charts layered with paths that curved in ways gravity should not allow. And in the skies above the forgotten planet Relin 9, the stars themselves shimmered strangely, shifting position ever so slightly, not truly moving but appearing to realign, forming a perfect circle visible only to those watching through high-level sensors, a shape echoed by the Aegis Dawn's internal system map. Scientists scrambled to explain the events, but their data made no sense. It followed no current science, obeyed no known law, and yet everything worked as if it had always been meant to, and that was when the oldest races began to whisper. A word not spoken since the dawn of the conquered. Remembrance. A time, spoken of only in legend, when the stars themselves had once been connected by a living network, not made of wires or waves, but of meaning, of memory, and of shared purpose. The old code, it seemed, was not just a system, but a language that space itself understood, one written into the background radiation of the universe, waiting for someone who still remembered how to speak it, not with sound, but with intention. The Aegis Dawn now hovered above a special location, what the ancient maps had once marked as the Celestial Lattice, a region of space thought to be empty, useless, too far from any real star systems to matter. But now, with the human ship at its center, strange signals began to appear again, pulsing through dark matter currents, causing minor energy ripples in stations light years away, as if space itself were responding. Dr. Evelyn Shaw stood before the conquered council once more, calm as ever, her voice soft and clear as she said, "This isn't power, it's memory, and it's waking up." Her words shook the chamber more than any weapon ever could, because she wasn't threatening anyone, she was explaining what had already begun. And sure enough, more signs followed. Forgotten ruins across the galaxy began to resonate when the Aegis Dawn passed by, glowing softly with long-dead energy, while extinct languages could now be read just by syncing them with the ship's frequency field. One station in particular, buried under the surface of the dead world Oth Kaloon, had always been considered non-functional, a relic of a lost race. But when the human ship approached, it opened its doors for the first time in 12,000 years and welcomed the crew with a message written in perfect Earth English. "We have waited. Show us what remains." Inside were vast halls filled with data crystals, libraries of unknown science, and deep within, a single device shaped like a star with arms reaching in all directions, humming gently, as if it too remembered something long lost. The ship didn't take anything. It only listened, and as it did, the device lit up and projected a series of star systems no one had ever seen, systems that weren't on any conquered map, systems hidden or perhaps protected by forces unknown. The message that followed came not in sound, but in shared thought, felt by everyone tuned to the ship's signal. When one remembers, others awaken, and so began what would later be called the Echo Phase, where civilizations across the galaxy started to find echoes of themselves in places they didn't expect. Old technologies that matched the patterns found on the Aegis Dawn. Abandoned systems that activated when spoken to with the human ship's unique frequencies, and most unsettling of all, dreams. Shared dreams experienced by scholars, AI cores, and even ordinary travelers. Dreams of light and shape and song that seemed to pull them toward forgotten stars. It was as if the universe had been asleep, and the humans had accidentally stepped on the right floorboard to make it shift. No one could deny it anymore. Earth wasn't just new, it was needed, and whatever knowledge or history it carried, it wasn't just for humanity alone. But even as allies gathered around the humans, some grew nervous. What if the memory that was waking wasn't friendly? What if the systems coming online were never meant to return? What if humanity wasn't the heir, but the final trigger? The assembly debated fiercely, torn between wonder and fear. But still the Aegis Dawn remained quiet, never offering force, only light and understanding. And somehow that was more unsettling than any weapon. Because now the stars were changing, not visibly, not violently, but in ways that made mathematicians sit in stunned silence, and ancient species remember fragments of old songs and symbols they hadn't thought of in ages. Even gravity itself behaved strangely in some places, curving toward the human ship like it wanted to be near it, like space had missed it. And above them all, the ship watched, not as a ruler, not as a conqueror, but as a bridge between what was and what might be again. And when the next ripple came, a burst of soft harmonic vibration that stretched across half the known galaxy and gently pulsed in sync with the human ship's lights, no one dared to speak, because deep down, everyone understood the same thing. The stars had remembered something, and they were calling it home. The Aegis Dawn floated in stillness, surrounded by a silence that was no longer emptiness, but filled with a tension that stretched across the stars, because now the galaxy was watching not with laughter or doubt, but with quiet, anxious respect. Ever since the ancient machines had begun to wake and the stars had shifted to form strange shapes in deep space, something had been building. Not a weapon, not a war, but a moment. A single point of decision that no one could fully see until it arrived. And now, after all the whispers, data searches, translations, and dreams, the moment had come. The conquered council, once fractured with fear and curiosity, now stood together on the Nexus station, facing Dr. Evelyn Shaw, who stood alone before them, calm but tired, her face marked by days of constant communication with her ship and the growing network of ancient signals that had begun to respond directly to her voice, as if she were a conductor to a choir only she could hear. Outside the station, stars formed new alignments, sending pulses of low light down gravitational lines only the Aegis Dawn could read, and with each pulse, another gate, vault, or beacon came online, confirming what no one could deny anymore. The galaxy was waking, and Earth had somehow kept the key without knowing it. Shaw spoke not with arrogance, but with purpose, saying the words that would shape the future of every species watching. This isn't just about us. It never was. The code didn't belong to any one race. It was always meant to connect, not to conquer. And now it's asking us to finish what was started long ago, to become more than we were together. Her voice echoed in the chamber, and though some still doubted, most had already seen too much to deny what was happening, especially when the station's old systems began to respond to her words, screens lighting up with unknown characters that translated themselves slowly into every language of the conquered, each saying the same thing. Begin accord. It was not a command. It was an invitation, and it shook the leaders of even the most powerful species, because it meant the code had made its choice, and that choice wasn't power, but unity. Still, there were those who resisted, the warborn. Cracks, who believed the code would give Earth a hidden weapon, the secretive Zalari, who feared loss of control, and even a faction of humans back on Earth who wanted to isolate and protect what they had found. But the code could not be owned, and that became clear when the Aegis Dawn transmitted a signal not from its own systems, but from the network of newly awakened nodes across the galaxy, all now lit with energy that responded only when multiple species stood together before them. It was as if the system had safeguards, ones that refused to allow any one race to dominate, instead rewarding cooperation with deeper access, as though the old builders had designed their legacy not as a weapon but as a test the modern galaxy had failed for millennia until now. Over the next week, joint expeditions were launched from Nexus, each team made up of scientists, engineers, and translators from different races, traveling to ancient structures and finding them open, responsive, and filled with knowledge. Technologies, not just for war or power, but for healing, for terraforming, for building and sustaining life, things the galaxy desperately needed after so many centuries of conflict. And everywhere the teams went, the presence of the Aegis Dawn made the system stabilize, as if the ship was a stabilizing force, a node that kept the network alive simply by existing. And so it was decided that the ship would remain at the center of the lattice, holding the balance while the new accord was written. One not based on territory or fleet size, but on contribution, cooperation, and shared memory. Shaw herself refused any position of command, instead passing control to a council made up of voices from every world that had touched the code, saying only that Earth will speak when needed and listen when not. It was a humble gesture, but powerful, and it set the tone for what came next. The dawning accord, signed not in ink or light, but through activation, each race, one by one, unlocking their section of the code and syncing it with the others, until the final moment when the network pulsed brightly, lighting up thousands of stars across known space with a gentle, silent flare that could be seen even from the surface of Earth, where ordinary people looked up and saw constellations shift into new patterns, unknowingly witnessing the birth of a new age. The celebration was quiet, not loud or filled with cheering, but marked by awe and a strange sense of peace, because everyone could feel it, even those who didn't understand the technology. Something ancient and vast had accepted them, welcomed them back into a greater whole. And now, for the first time in known history, the galaxy was not ruled, not conquered, but connected. In the final hour of the signing, the Aegis Dawn released one last message, not as sound or text, but as a holographic star map with new coordinates, unexplored systems far beyond the edge of the known void, each marked not with labels but with open circles, as if offering a question instead of a command. It was a sign that the work was not done, that the code had more to reveal, and that the great journey was only just beginning. Evelyn Shaw looked out from the observation deck at those distant stars and smiled softly, whispering to herself the words her grandmother once told her as a child. The stars remember more than we think. They're just waiting for us to listen. And now finally the galaxy had begun to listen. And in that quiet, shared listening, it found not fear, not war, not silence, but hope.